Honestly, I'd be lying if I was to say that it's been some time since the last cave game we took a look at. You know, because of Ibarra just 4 episodes ago. But it has been a bit of time since the last Xbox 360 era cave shooter we've seen here, and one of their best has finally seen release in North America on the PlayStation Network store. We may have overlooked Ketsui Kizuna Jigoku Tachi Extra on Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 on Bullet Heaven before, but now we have no excuse. Ketsui Deathtiny Kizuna Jigoku Tachi, no, not Deathtiny or Deathtiny, but Destiny due to ambiguous Japanese pronunciations and their love for linguistic jokes and puns,
Destiny
was released to the PSN store on November 20th, 2020 by M2 as part of its excellent Shot Triggers line. It also saw release in Japan with a full retail version almost 2 years prior on November 29th, 2018. Like Battle Garega Revision 2016, Dengun Feveran and Maho Daisakusen before it, and of course Esprit Dosai since. Ketsui Deathtiny is jam-packed with just a ton of amazing features, modes, and options. Let's take a closer look. Ketsui in general is one of Cave's finer works, and its gameplay, while similar to many of their other titles, is shaken up radically in a few different ways. Sure, the movement controls here are as simple as they come, just your standard 8-way inputs, but the player's weapons are quite a bit more involved than, say, Mushihime-sama or Dodanpachi. As always, players have a rapid shot paired with full speed movement and a focus shot that reduces the player's speed significantly. The rapid shot will continuously fire from the player's ship as well as each of the options flying in formation with it. Players start with just 2 of these bits, but as they increase their weapon's power through items dropped from certain enemies, the number of options that accompany the player will increase. Here's where things get spicy though. When focus fire is engaged, the player's range will decrease and a narrow stream of high-powered bullets will be fired. Enemies directly adjacent or in the path of this focus fire will be locked onto and shot by the options that players have available to them. The player will remain locked on until either the enemy is destroyed or the player disengages focus fire. This gives players a high degree of flexibility in their offensive style and even allows them to attack multiple points on larger enemies at once. As is typically the case, players also have access to a limited stock of bombers that can be deployed to clear the screen of bullets and lay down heavy damage to larger groups of enemies or bosses. They aren't of an especially large size though. In fact, they will also be fired from the player's options, with more bomb shots resulting at higher weapon levels. These bomber shots will also track down the shot path of locked options and even bounce off the screen boundaries if players are close to the edge of the screen. Ultimately, they will explode at the top of the screen if they don't impact with an enemy as they traverse the screen. The bomber attack is extremely flexible, but over-reliance can be detrimental, as we'll see a little later on. Ketsui features 2 different playable helicopters that vary in a few different ways. The Tiger Schwert is an orange ship that has a wide pattern shot type, slower overall movement, and a quicker lock-on sequence. Meanwhile, the blue Panzerjäger fires in a straight-line fashion with snappier movement and a slower lock-on function. Both of these ships do a good job of dishing the destruction, but offers players a balanced choice to cater to their playstyle. Ketsui in general is played over the course of 5 main stages. Each has a significant mid-boss to contend with, though the much longer Stage 5 has several more. Of course, even with its excellent control, it's still a pretty tough game, yet still comes off as manageable at least for intermediate players. A second loop also exists in Ketsui, but can only be accessed by way of very stringent conditions that are extremely difficult to fulfill. This condition relies heavily on how many lives the player goes through, how many bombs are deployed, and the score that the players achieve. And it's all very, very difficult to do, a perfect incentive for veterans and experts. But, and perhaps thankfully, the regular arcade version of the game isn't all players will find here. Like Battle Garega Revision 2016 before it, there really is something here for everyone in the Ketsui Deathtiny Shot Triggers package. For new players that are just starting out in the world of bullet hell style shooting games, a super easy mode allows players to dive in to get a taste of the stage layouts, enemy waves, and bosses that Ketsui features. With fewer shots fired at a slower velocity, as well as an auto-bomber feature, even the greenest of players should be able to score a 1cc in no time at all. Even lesser intermediate players should have no trouble pulling off a 1 life clear with very little practice. Next up is the very rare IKD 2007 Matsuri arcade version, sometimes known as Blue Label. Sold as DLC in the downloadable versions of the game, but included on the disc version, this is where hardcore Ketsui veterans will find more value in the Destiny release. The IKD 2007 version boosts up the difficulty significantly, but balances things out with a constantly full shot power. Scoring differs slightly here too, which we'll take a look at later in the review. And then there's Ketsui Deathtiny's namesake, the excellent Destiny Arrange mode. Destiny plays a bit differently than the other versions included with this release, introducing different bomber and scoring mechanics to the mix. Players have a fully powered ship to lay waste to everything in their path, and enemy fire is moderate. As enemies are destroyed, they will release blue chips rather than numbered scoring chips. These blue chips will fill a gauge at the bottom corner of the player side of the screen called the Death Troy gauge. Well, it says Death Troy, but we figure that this should be pronounced Destroy because, ambiguous pronunciations.
Destroy.
The Destroy system has multiple tiers that allow for various effects. Level 1 is defensive, activating a shield around the player craft and clearing bullets and converting them to gold chips on the outset of its deployment. A secondary bullet clear occurs at the conclusion of its effect. Level 1 Destroy also serves as an auto-bomber if the player is struck with an errant bullet, but will not work if Level 2 or above has been engaged. If the player immediately follows Destroy Level 1 with a second Destroy, it engages Level 2, which results in more gold chips, but no bullet clears or shields. Level 3 is more of the same, with even more golden chips rewarded for enemy kills. Up to 3 destroys can be performed on a single gauge, though levels beyond 3 can be achieved if bomber or power-up items are collected, which also fills the destroy gauge. But there's an even juicier incentive here. Under certain conditions, obtaining a level 3 destroy, then filling the gauge to where it can be used for another level 1 destroy, will trigger a secondary gauge that reads Hold Bomber. When the bomber button is held, this gauge fills and activates Die Death mode when full. This is where players will find their true destiny. In Die Death, enemy fire ramps way up, resulting in more difficulty but also more scoring opportunities. Players can also get knocked out of Die Death if they end up getting hit, with the possibility of losing the ability to get back in unless further conditions are met. A 1cc is actually easy enough to accomplish in Destiny, but in Die Death, players will definitely have their work cut out for them. In the end, the Destiny mode is one of our favorites between all of the arranged modes in Ketsui, just behind the awesome X mode in Kizuna Jigoku Tachi Extra on PS3 and Xbox 360. Rounding out the play modes in Ketsui Deathtiny are a custom mode that allows players to tweak and balance the game to their liking, Arcade Challenge, which does a good job of training players at completing every section of the game, and a really cool Bond development mode, Kizuna mode for short, which saves players positions in spots they die frequently in. Players can go back to these spots and start 5 seconds before they died in an attempt to survive the ordeals that killed them. Up to 25 of these moments will be saved at a time. All of these modes and features are truly excellent, and they make Ketsui Deathtiny the most fun that we've had with a bullet hell shooter to date. In many ways, they come together to form the very best cave shooting experience that has been released so far. And that's kinda saying something. But the core gameplay is just one facet to this release, as Ketsui scoring is just as important. Ketsui's scoring is almost iconic, due mostly in part to the numeric cube-shaped score chips which players collect as they defeat their foes. These reside at the core of the scoring, allowing daring players to amass large amounts of points through a clever multiplier system based on proximity and duration. Arcade, Super Easy, and IKD 2007 all employ a more or less identical system with regards to these mechanics. Players will receive score chips from defeated enemies bearing a numeric indicator between 1 and 5. Activated with regular fire, the closer the player is to the enemy that has been destroyed, the higher this number will be. These will be added to a stage total displayed in the top corner of the player side of the screen. The number collected will also be added to a multiplier displayed below the overall stage total, which modifies enemy kill scores. When players do activate higher valued cubes, a counter will also display which rapidly decreases from 50 to 0, at which point it disappears. This counter will also reset to 50 as additional chips of the same value are obtained. So long as this counter is in play, the player can trigger the highest chip values they've activated by using Lock on Fire, regardless of proximity. However, any collected chips dropped from locked fire will reduce the current multiplier. It's a fairly intuitive system which takes very little time to get the hang of. The challenge lies in whether players are brave enough to dive into the fray in an attempt to get higher valued chips while contending with heavy enemy fire from their opposition. In doing so successfully, it should take very little time to see the first extent of the game. This system is modified slightly for IKD 2007 Arrange, as the proximity required for anything but a level 1 chip is clustered very tightly together, very close to the player's ship. Especially given that there is quite a bit more to contend with in regards to enemy bullets and their density, the scoring is quite a bit trickier as a result, but will still likely be something that veterans and experts should appreciate. Destiny mode is similar to Arcade, Super Easy, and IKD 2007, but no variable values are achieved by way of proximity. Both blue and gold chips will add to the stage and multiplier totals as is the norm, and locked fire will decrease the multiplier values as was the case before. This information is no longer in the main playfield, instead displaying in the accompanying M2 gadgets. Activating Destroy maintains these counts, but getting hit with a stray bullet will drop the player's totals. Worse still, if the player is reduced to their final life, they'll only be able to achieve a maximum stage total of 500 and a multiplier of only 50 until an extend is obtained, which is, of course, much harder with the reduced point rates. Of course, if we're talking Destiny mode, Die Death is where players will get stupid amounts of points. Not only do more chips appear, they get absolutely huge at Die Death Destroy level 3. Which further exemplifies Ketsui's risk-reward scoring hooks. Destiny may not be quite as fun as X mode in the gameplay department, but it definitely has the most fun scoring system among all of the arranged modes we've played. In all modes, as players take on the stage boss, the chip total that was collected throughout the stage will steadily count down. When the boss is finally felled, the remaining amount is applied as a multiplier for the boss kill. Stage End then applies a clear bonus, taking the final remaining collected chip value, the number of lives the player has, and the number of bombers left in the stock into consideration. Destiny behaves very similarly, though once again the values applied are only visible in the M2 gadgets. Essentially, the large focus on real risk-reward makes for a solid, fun scoring system that doesn't collapse upon itself with much minutia like Dodonpachi seems to. And unlike, say, Mushihime-sama Futari, the scoring system is more or less consistent between its various versions and arrangements, so skill learned in one release can be applied to the others. Local leaderboards are of course present, and as is the case with most modern shooting releases and others in the M2 Shot Triggers line, online leaderboards allow players to stack themselves up with other Ketsui players around the world. This is sure to increase replay value of the game, especially for score chasers. When it comes to Danmaku-style shooters from the 6th and 7th generations, Cave's presentation has always been consistently great, especially with regards to its 2D titles. M2 takes this and amps it up to 11. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. Ketsui itself has some really cool design behind it, and although the visuals are purposefully drab and muted with regards to its backgrounds, they still feature all kinds of great detail and awesome design. Obviously, it doesn't end there. All of the sprites in Ketsui are derived from 3D models, but 100% of them are sprite-based. All of the enemies, and especially the bosses, are superbly detailed. Not surprisingly, the player ships also feature the kind of excellent animation and detail as one might expect from the best Cave shooters. This holds true with every mode included in the Destiny release. Add to that a brand new intro movie that actually appears to be real-time and looking fine, as well as a number of great high-quality images when loading up the various modes available, and Ketsui Deathtiny is a visual winner. Mostly. Despite the great mechanical and stage design, the sprites and backgrounds employed are still rather chunky compared to other games like Mushi Futari or Dodonpachi Resurrection or Saidaioujo. The sound is another great aspect to Ketsui though, and whether it's the shots, explosions, the item collections, or VO, it all makes Ketsui instantly identifiable. But the most recognizable sound of all, outside of the game's announcer of course, is definitely the lock-on effect. This sound is going to be heard quite a bit, and while we don't really mind it, we could definitely see some players getting a little annoyed with it over time. The music in Ketsui also makes up a huge part of its identity. Like many of Cave's games, the soundtrack is headed up by Manabu Namiki. While there are definitely hallmarks to this soundtrack that resemble many of his other works, Namiki has done a very good job of differentiating each of his works from one another, and Ketsui's flavor is greatly enhanced in doing so. Well, even if the Amen break is used extensively in many of the tracks. The Namiki original isn't all players will find here. Not only is there a new stereo arrangement by Namiki himself, the Bass Escape Arranged soundtrack that was first featured in the Xbox 360 and PS3 Extra releases X mode is also here, as well as an arrangement by Cave's Daisuke Matsumoto. A fifth DLC soundtrack can also be purchased that features the Jake Kaufman arrangements from Daifukat's Black Label's Ketsupachi release. While the PSN versions of Ketsui require this to be an extra purchase, the Japanese disc version of the game has this feature included. Which brings us to the biggest aspect of the presentation, the M2 gadgets. Many gadgets are available in Ketsui Deathtiny that do a great job of assisting players with various aspects to their gameplay. Real-time multiplier information, a chip radar, second loop eligibility, damage output, a bullet counter, and more allow players to see the finer aspect of their game experience at a glance. And that's all not even to mention this super slick stage map complete with boss and sub-boss information, one of the coolest features we've seen in the Shot Trigger series so far. All kinds of options and settings also exist for the player's screen, such as scaling and tate support, as well as image filters, control rebinding, sound balancing, and more. These options are accessible by clicking in the PS4 controller's touchpad. It should be noted that the disc version of Ketsui Deathtiny is entirely in Japanese, with no update as of this review to add an English language option. This menu system is also a little confusing to navigate as well. Thankfully, the version available in the North American PSN store is fully localized, so Western players can finally see what's up. It's still kinda difficult to get through though. Finally, as is typically the case, a number of trophies are also available for players to squeeze even more replay out of Ketsui, which rounds out its presentation. So, how does Ketsui Deathtiny stack up? Let's take a look. Ketsui's controls are intuitive and super sharp. The lock-on mechanics give players all kinds of flexibility between regular shots and bombers. Ketsui is a tough game, but not in a way that's impossible to crack for intermediate players. The super easy, custom, Destiny, and IKD 2007 variants give players of different base skill a decent starting point and challenge. Ketsui is only 5 stages long, but its 5th stage is worth at least 2. But even with only 5 stages, its 5 included modes as well as its training, Kizuna, and online leaderboard features give Ketsui Deathtiny a lot of staying power. Ketsui looks pretty fantastic despite being a mostly drab affair color-wise. Excellent sprite work and mechanical design shine through. But everything is a little rough around the edges, and it doesn't look as smooth as, say, Mushi Futari's HD modes. Ketsui has just about the most cave soundtrack there is, Amen Break notwithstanding. When we think cave music, we think Manabu Namiki, and when we think Namiki, we think Ketsui. The stereo, bass escape, Matsumoto, and downloadable Vert arranged soundtracks are a nice addition, but some are less good than others. Ketsui is probably the most refined cave title to date, and the Destiny version's many modes add just the right twists in sometimes subtle and other times not so subtle ways. It's all excellent, though we do truly miss the extra releases X mode. Ketsui Deathtiny weighs in at about $35 US, which is a moderately expensive shooter for being a downloadable title, but its extra modes and masterful gameplay is probably well worth the price of admission. While the DLC required for the IKD 2007 version and Jake Kaufman arranged tracks will cost the player another $8 each for a total of $51, the disc version will set players back about $65. Once again though, it's only available in Japanese. Doranpachi Resurrection was superb. Mushihime-sama Futari was even better, but we think Cave truly peaked with Ketsui, and while we sorely miss the X mode from the Ketsui Extra release, M2 has crafted what is easily the most accessible and in-depth Cave experience anywhere. It may be a bit on the pricey side, but it's worth the price of admission. Ketsui Deathtiny Kizuna Jigoku Tachi gets a 4.75 out of 5. You can get a copy of Ketsui Deathtiny Kizuna Jigoku Tachi on the USN PSN shop for about $35 for the base game and $8 each for its DLC packs, or physically on sites such as PlayAsia for around $65. Given the amount of time it took us to put this review together, I guess it's fitting that this review was as long as it ended up. Well, 2020 is almost done, and we hope to have a couple more reviews out before it all comes to a close. Next up, a quick look at Super Psy Penguin, followed by the ridiculous Freedom Finger on Nintendo Switch. And for our grand 2020 finale, well, as long as time permits, the Darius Cosmic Collection arcade and console releases for PlayStation 4. See you all in the next episode.